Welcome to The Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, this movie, a bomb? That's difficult to believe. This is The Princess Bride. Welcome to The Blast Zone.
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like The Princess Bride, which we'll be talking about today. It's a big one to start off 2023.
Here we go.
But before we get into that, Ian, how are you doing this week? You seem a little overeager. You jumped in on me on the intro there. I know they won't hear it, but I want the people to know that it happened.
I'm jumping the gun. I'm jittery. I guess I'm bringing some energy to the show, a little bit optimistic. And, it might be because of this movie. It took up a big part of my week. It's so cathartic for me. This week's movie, The Princess Bride, I found myself literally sobbing with laughter every time I watched it. And I watched it 2 or 3 times, depending on how you count. And we'll talk about that after your monologue. But yeah, I think it's changing me for the better. Princess Bride therapy. Try it, folks.
Yeah, I don't think we've covered a stone cold classic like this in quite a while. With Children of Men, sure, but that's not exactly a cathartic feel-good movie.
It's not uplifting.
What was the last, stone cold classic movie we covered? Was it True Romance, maybe? We have movies that we love, but when you're talking about like film as a whole, what's a movie you can point to that we've covered that almost nobody has a problem with? I think it was True Romance, which was 6 months ago at this point.
Yeah, even that. Is that unquestioned by everybody? I go all the way back to like Shawshank as unassailable, but that takes us way back to the early days.
We're skipping semi-pro. That just goes without saying. We don't even have to specify
right,
that
everyone
one.
Knew that.
You know what? I think Clue and The Princess Bride are intermingled in my mind because I discovered them at similar points in my life.
Sure.
I was around the same age. I watched them both on VHS over and over again as a kid. I always associate those two, and they kind of have a similar tone.
They do.
They're very comedic, but also there's some real stakes, and you really do start to connect with the characters. The Princess Bride more so has some real heart to it.
Yes.
But Clue also is not a movie without its connections to the characters.
Just a great ensemble, a bunch of really fun actors and performances.
And Lee Ving, your old buddy.
That's right. I don't care about him. No, he didn't care about me. He made it clear.
Right. Yeah, he screamed it at you.
That's right.
It's Lee Ving, the singer of the punk band Fear, for those of you not following along. He played Mr. Body in Clue. Anyway, it's the new year. It's 2023.
Yeah.
What did you decide to start your year off watching? Anything exciting you wanted to tell the people about?
I watched something pretty fun. It's called Triangle of Sadness.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, surprisingly, I didn't know what that meant until I watched the movie. It refers to the little crease between your eyebrows. Came out last October. It's actually still in a few theaters, but it's available for rental. So that's why I thought it'd be good to talk about it. You can watch this movie if you want to. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes this year, so has some bona fides. Directed by a Swedish filmmaker named Ruben Östlund. And this movie is fucking batshit. It starts out as a really interesting contemporary relationship drama, and it spirals into madness to the extent that it's hard to watch. You're like, oh no, I can't watch this. And you're laughing uproariously at the same time. It's a big experience watching this movie. And I'm like, you know what? That's a win because I had no idea what to expect going in. And I was just taken for a big ride. And a lot of the movie is about the plot, which is very ridiculous. But there's also, very interestingly, the movie itself is a very overt exploration of capitalism, of class, of money, power. So it's really interesting for that reason. And then it just, so many oh no moments. It's wild.
Well, you always say you like a movie to make you feel feelings, and it sounds like this one did, just maybe not feelings usually like shock, horror.
Yeah. And I don't even want to describe what it is. It's not a horror movie, but very uncomfortable and fucked shit goes down.
I know it's got Woody Harrelson in it. So like that's usually all I need to hear to check a movie out. Give it at least a little try.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make it my mission to watch this movie before the next time we record.
Love to hear what you think.
It's funny because it's rare we're able to find a link between the movies we both watch because you're very focused trying to find some thematic link between something we talked about on the podcast and whatever movie you bring to show and tell.
I do try.
And I have 2 small children, so I'm just like, this is what I had time to watch this week. But talking about an exploration of capitalism and excess, the movie I watched tackles that too, albeit in a more overtly comedic way, I would imagine. But I checked out the David Harbour as murderous Santa comedy/action movie Violent Night.
Okay.
We're recording this just a few days after Christmas, and we hosted Christmas at my house, and we had a great day and evening, and
nice.
We all ate all the food we could. So the kids went to bed bed, me and my sister partook in a little bit of the marijuana, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I think I do.
I didn't code the message at all, so you must know what I mean. I said the word marijuana. That's pretty straightforward. And then we decided to watch Violent Night, which I'd seen the trailer for, and it felt like a trailer that you would see on Saturday Night Live for a movie that wasn't real.
Oh.
Except it was.
Uh-huh.
I was not sure what to expect going in. Was they going to go a horror route? Was it going to be just a comedy? But it really is more of a way more graphically violent Die Hard with more jokes, but Santa is John McClane.
Oh.
And it fucking rules. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it sounds really good.
It's great. It's bloody, but not like in a way where it's ever frightening if you're worried about it being like a horror movie. It's not trying to scare you at all. It is trying to make you laugh, even with the violence. It's so over the top that it's impossible not to laugh at it. You know, he plays a very cynical Santa Claus with a dark past. So they actually explain why he's such a badass at killing people, even though he's Santa, which I appreciated. They give him like a tragic backstory.
That's cool.
Yeah, it fucking rips. And there's actually like a decent emotional core to the movie. Some of the acting from the supporting cast is not 100% perfect, but you definitely forgive that. It does have some great performances, like Beverly D'Angelo playing a billionaire power broker type lady who's working with the U.S. government as like a defense contractor.
Okay.
John Leguizamo just absolutely hamming it up as a kind of terrorist. He's basically playing the Hans Gruber role, but he hates Christmas. So that's like a fun little wrinkle into it. It's a really fun time. I definitely recommend it. And it's going to be a yearly tradition, I think. After the kids go to bed, me and my sister are going to smoke a joint and watch Violent Night.
That is high praise to immediately get a spot on the tradition shelf. I'm going to have to watch this.
Yeah, when everyone's awake, you watch Elf and A Christmas Story and Home Alone and all the... But then when the kids go to bed, you can crank up Violent Night and have a good time. If you don't go into it with expectations of like lofty cinema, you will enjoy it.
Okay.
But we're talking about lofty cinema today. We're talking about, frankly, a groundbreaking film, The Princess Bride.
Yes.
A big deal. One of maybe the most beloved movie we've covered. It's got to be up there.
Yeah.
It's not quite as critically acclaimed maybe as Shawshank, but it's not far behind.
It's beloved for different reasons. It's not an Oscar movie, but it is just a movie that people love. It's a movie that people love to quote, which makes it just, it's so deeply embedded in pop culture. And what struck me is maybe one of the next most beloved things that we've talked about is another Rob Reiner movie, Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
Nearly as quotable. And I'm actually not sure which of these two movies is more quotable. They're both right up there in the very top pantheon of quotable movies.
I think they're both movies which have entered this kind of rarefied zone where there are definitely people that have quoted both those movies that haven't seen them. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Which is just the highest praise you can shower a movie with, is that people quote it without even realizing they're doing it. But like the phrases have just entered the cultural lexicon to such a degree, there's no escaping them.
So many things, man. And it's great to go back to this movie and remember how many there are. It feels like almost every other line in the movie is like, oh, I remember that line.
When was the last time you watched this before this week?
It's been years. It was definitely years. And so it was fun to come back to it with as close as you can get to fresh eyes with something like this.
Yeah, same for me. I don't think I'd seen this since I was like a teenager. So it had been decades, really. I mean, at least a decade and a half since I'd seen it. I still love the movie, obviously, but it was different than I remembered in the sense that I think when I was younger, I viewed it more as like a straightforward adventure film with comedic elements. And maybe some of the jokes just I didn't grasp at the time, or they didn't strike me the same way. But watching it this week, I was like, it's much more of a comedy than I remember. Like it's overtly humorous in ways I didn't always comprehend, while still having a really great emotional core and characters you really are invested in. And they all go on journeys and they all have goals. Like it's just really, I mean, William Goldman is fucking great screenwriter, obviously. Kiva Goldsmith, he is not. Even like these kind of side characters or supporting characters all have motivations that make sense. And they feel like people that are just inhabiting this world rather than characters that were written to fill space.
It's a testament to the skill level, how quickly and with what deft, light, and fast brushstrokes it paints these stories, the romance, painted in just a handful of lines. And yet you're totally enthralled with these two lovers. And you're like, oh my God, I feel for them so much. And like, same with all the characters. It does it so effortlessly. And yet it draws you into all of their stories and all their drama, in addition to just being a fucking joke a minute. It's fantastically written and executed.
Now, you mentioned the romance between Wesley and Buttercup, which just gets you invested immediately. But what's going on with this farm? Do you know?
Your question is like, why are there two 20-somethings alone on a farm?
Do her parents own the farm and they're like went off to war? Did she inherit the farm? Why does the farm only seem to have firewood and 2 chickens and a horse?
It's a prop farm for sure. I just got a clue actually this afternoon in watching a YouTube video that was talking about the differences between the book and the movie. Apparently she has parents in the book, and they just, for the movie, they stripped them out and didn't bother showing anybody but the two of them on that lonely little cute little farm.
It obviously still works. I'm just nitpicking for comedic effect. But yeah, me and my wife watched it together last night because she's also a big fan of this movie. My wife, Jamie.
Oh, nice.
And we own Princess Bride wine, which is they have like cute little names for them. Hold on, let me see if I can find them real quick. I should have brought the bottles in here. But she's had these wine bottles since I met her, and we've never drank them. We refused to drink them. We almost drank them last night, but we decided not to, just because, you know, after the holidays, you've been drinking a lot. We didn't need more. Yeah, they have Inconceivable Cabernet.
Okay.
And As You Wish Pinot Grigio. We have them both in a little gift set, but we did not crack them out. So if we didn't do it for this, we never will.
No, it's like, that sounds like a really cute Princess Bride gift, but like drinking the wine itself is probably not the good part.
It's probably not the best wine. Let's be honest. This type of stuff never really pays off. But that kind of goes to show that in the year 2022, they're still making wine based on this movie that is well over 30 years old at this point. 35 years old to be exact. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of stuff coming out about it because of the 35th anniversary, because that's a big one that you celebrate all the time. 35. That's what everyone says. That's the big one.
The big 3-5?
Yeah.
I don't know. These folks are getting old. When I looked up the movie, there's some good stuff from the 25 and from the 30. And then this year was just, okay, it's another 5. Let's get on YouTube and make some videos about it.
Is Cary Elwes going to write another memoir about the Princess Bride? What are we going to, but yeah, where do you go from here? It's in mind to the vein.
But it's great. It's great that there's so much content about it, because when you revisit it like we did and you get stoked about it, you can go down rabbit holes and just soak up all the feel-good nostalgia that you want.
If you get psyched about it now, or if you happen to be one of the dozens of Quibi subscribers, you could have watched it way back in 2020 when they had a fun new series they debuted.
Yes.
Princess Bride.
Oh man, we're going to have to spend some time talking about that. Do you want to bring that up now, or should we wait?
Okay, it comes up at the end of my monologue, so we can kind of go right from that into there. Do you want to hear about the making of the movie? This one had, like a lot of the movies we cover, a bit of a tortured production. I'm starting to wonder if every movie just has a little bit of a tortured production and we just don't hear about it if they're not a big deal.
Filmmaking seems to be a tortured business, but let's hear what happened in this particular case.
All right. In 1973, William Goldman published his fantasy adventure romance comedy novel, The Princess Bride, which was immediately a decent-sized hit. Fortuitously, a youngish Rob Reiner would receive a copy of the book from his father Carl and immediately became a huge fan. Goldman sold 20th Century Fox the film rights to the book the same year it was published, and several accomplished directors like Richard Lester, Francois Truffaut, Robert Redford, and Norman Jewison would all unsuccessfully attempt to adapt it into a movie. A frustrated Goldman would use his own money to buy the rights back, and the project was dead in the water for a time.
In eel-infested waters?
While all this was going on, Reiner was becoming a filmmaker of renown in his own right. After his mockumentary This Is Spinal Tap became a huge cult classic. With some newfound cachet in Hollywood, Reiner turned his attention toward adapting one of his favorite books, speaking to Paramount about potentially making the film while he was filming Stand By Me for them.
Do you guys want to see a dead project?
This is when he found out about the several other attempts to make a Princess Bride movie, and Paramount told him hell no. Reiner turned to producer Norman Lear, who had helped fund Spinal Tap, and Lear agreed to help finance the movie. Reiner reached out to Goldman, wanting him to be involved in the writing of the screenplay, and he was on board. With a budget of $16 million set, 20th Century Fox was secured as the distributor for the movie, and it was time for Reiner to start casting his dream project. Reiner had always planned on casting Cary Elwes as Wesley, reportedly based on his performance in Lady Jane. Elwes was in Germany filming Mashenka, and Reiner flew out to meet him to evaluate him and gauge his interest. Elwes had read the book in his childhood and had always seen himself in the character of Wesley. Some other actors were auditioned, but Elwes was always understood to be the top choice. Buttercup was a more difficult role to cast, with Uma Thurman, Meg Ryan, Sean Young, Susie Amos, Courtney Cox, Alexandra Paul, and Whoopi Goldberg all auditioning unsuccessfully for the role, with Robin Wright ultimately being cast only a week before filming began. The supporting cast was rounded out with reliable names like Mandy Patinkin, Wallace Shawn, Chris Sarandon, and Spinal Tap member Christopher Guest, while the role of the giant Fezzik was more difficult. Goldman had always wanted Andre the Giant for the role, but his wrestling schedule was too hectic to allow him to take it on. His second choice had been Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was highly bookable for a role of that size in the 70s, but by the time Reiner's adaptation was ready to begin filming, was far too big a star. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Lou Ferrigno, Carol Struycken, and even Liam Neeson auditioned for the role.
Anybody want a very particular set of peanuts?
But Andre's wrestling schedule eventually cleared up, and Goldman got his first pick. Filmed between August and December of 1986 in various locations around Ireland and England, the movie was set for a release of September 25th, 1987. Reviews were overwhelmingly positive, as the movie successfully captured the spirit and tone of Goldman's quote-unquote unfilmable novel. But the movie was never given a fair shake in theaters, as it was only in about 800 theaters at its highest point.
That's absolutely, totally, and in all other ways inconceivable.
The per-screen averages were good, but the total gross was just over $30 million, meaning the movie likely failed to turn a profit theatrically. It would become an instant classic on home media, though, spawning a number of ancillary CW products, re-releases, memoirs, and constant rumors of a remake. The majority of the cast would reunite in 2020 to do a virtual read-through of the script to support the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, and Jason Reitman would direct a DIY recreation of the movie as a miniseries for doomed streaming platform Quibi, also in 2020. Titled Home Movie: The Princess Bride, the miniseries followed the same fundamental plot as the movie over 10 parts, with most parts being played by a variety of actors. It's on YouTube in various levels of pirated quality. All right, so let's talk about Home Movie: A Princess Bride.
Oh, man.
Made by Jason Reitman for Quibi.
Yeah, R.I.P. Quibi. Maybe the only good thing that ever came out of Quibi.
No, there was the Rachel Brosnahan miniseries where she has a golden arm and she refuses to. And
I heard about that.
All I know about is she has a golden arm that she's like weirdly attached to.
Yes.
Now I kind of want to see it.
I heard of that and I never got to see that either. But so, I said that I was like crying tears of joy rewatching the original this week. I cried just as many or more tears watching this stupid home movie thing, which is in some ways it's dumb, but it's so satisfying. And I was struggling to try to figure out why I was having such a strong reaction to it. I think there's a bunch of factors. Did you get to watch some or all of that?
I watched like a highlight compilation of it. So I didn't have time to watch all of it, but I got to see a majority of at least who they picked for each role read a line or two. And I thought that was pretty cool. Like seeing Pedro Pascal read Inigo Montoya, I was like, that's just because like when you hear Mandy Patinkin's voice, you're like, oh man, that would totally be Pedro Pascal today.
Yes, there's some amazing actors doing Inigo in it. And that's so a big part of the fun of it is watching through it and watching who pops up in the role because it changes constantly. Everybody did little scenes. And this was made during the first wave of COVID when everyone was staying inside. And so it's all shot on people's iPhones. So there's this fun thing of just, hey, I'm hanging out with all my favorite famous actors and they're doing this funny, jokey thing, wearing costumes that they dug out of their closet and shooting in their backyard. And it's like, they love the movie as much as I do. And it's like having a friend who you can quote a movie with, only that friend is your favorite movie star. So it's really enjoyable for that reason.
It feels unifying in a way. Just like everyone loves this movie just like me. And it is kind of special.
It's really neat. And also like it works as a great way to break down the movie because you go, wait, what if I just took the script and read it? Would it still work? And by pulling the script out of its original context of the movie, in this fairly simplified form, you go, damn, this fucking movie works like scene to scene and line to line. It just really works as a story. And so it's also a great way to take a fresh look at the film.
Yeah, for something that's at its core almost a farce, the movie is just so meticulously plotted and written. It really drives home the point that we're watching people just at the top of their form put this together that could have been disastrous in the wrong hands.
Absolutely, everybody. It's incredible. Except for, and we'll talk about it, like the one thing is the production values. Going back to it, I don't know if you had this experience. The production values are worse than I remembered.
Yes, I have a few notes along those lines. But that's part of the charm too. Like
it absolutely is. And it's also beautiful, but it's also like silly and corny in spots. And you just have to accept that's what it's doing. But as you watch those retrospectives that all the actors and filmmakers did down the line in the years since, they all talk about how this is just a unique experience in their careers. And they knew pretty much right away that they were part of something special that didn't happen to many people and wasn't going to happen again in their careers.
It really does feel like there's before The Princess Bride and there's after The Princess Bride, not just for the people involved in it, but for movies.
Yeah.
It was just a huge event, a shifting point in how we like fandom to a degree and the idea of a cult movie, what it means and how frankly like lucrative it can be.
It's amazing. I'm just thinking back like my initial impressions of it and they're all about people quoting the movie. And it's just like, oh yeah, you're doing Vizzini right now and they're doing As You Wish and that word, I don't think it means what you think it means. And just like there's so many things that were just like shit that people would say to each other constantly in the late 80s. And it's like, yeah, that's all this one movie. It's amazing.
And I was the age to start enjoying this movie in the late 90s and people were still quoting it at each other. So it's just, and it's the same today. It's all you have to do is send a tweet out with this movie and your replies will just be full of people quoting the movie back to you. Cary Elwes says he gets it quoted to him. Mandy Patinkin gets it quoted to him every day. His famous speech, Wallace Shawn shouting "conceivable" at him. He said it. He seems a little less enamored with it though than like Mandy Patinkin does. Because Mandy Patinkin and Cary Elwes have other like signature roles. I don't know that Wallace Shawn does to the same degree. So he might feel a little pigeonholed.
What did he turn up in where we noticed theaters, he was doing a knockoff of Vizzini.
Oh, what was it?
Was that Meteor Man?
Was it Meteor Man? Yeah, he was the teacher, right?
He was a teacher, like a colleague of the hero, the Robert Townsend character.
That was still pretty close after The Princess Bride, right? Because that was what? Oh, no, it wasn't that close. No.
And they gave him like a catchriphase that sounded like inconceivable, but it was a different word.
He was Mr. Little in Meteor Man. Man, he's worked nonstop, though. Oh, he's Rex in Toy Story. What am I talking about? He's got another signature role. Of course he does.
But they don't know.
I know. I just discovered it. He pops up in he does a lot of voice work now that I'm seeing this.
He's fantastic.
He's in Southland Tales, so we'll be talking about him again.
Oh, neat.
At some point. Yes. Not to besmirch Wallace Shawn, but this is by far the biggest role of his career and the one he's most known for. And Cary Elwes kind of knew him more as Robin Hood as a kid.
Sure.
He was in Men in Tights, the Mel Brooks Robin Hood. And we'll talk, there is a lot of Mel Brooks humor in this movie. You could see the parallels there.
For sure.
It totally works. Seeing him as Wesley, it makes sense that Mel Brooks would cast him as his Robin Hood.
Absolutely.
You want to walk through the story? There's a bit of plot to get through in this one. It moves briskly, which, by the way, another thing I just want to give this movie credit for. 1 hour and 38 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Princess Bride and Rob Reiner.
Yeah. Thank you, 1980s. I feel like that was like you just couldn't get away with that much more back then.
I don't know, man. We're going to do one from the 70s in 2 weeks. That was quite a mountain to climb.
There's a few auteurs, right? I'm thinking of Warren Beatty's Reds, which was like 3 hours. I saw that in a theater in the 1980s, and it had a fucking intermission. Like, sheesh. It literally stopped the film and said, get up and stretch your legs. Come back to this.
Oh, the one I'm thinking of is only 2 hours and 1 minute. So that's not as bad. I thought it was going to be a little bit worse. Did I give it away? Do I tell people what we're doing in 2 weeks?
Oh my gosh, I don't know.
I'm not doing it because schedules can change. I don't want to disappoint anyone.
Build some suspense here.
I'm more excited for next week's movie, honestly. Okay. You don't even know what it is, do you?
I don't. I haven't looked. I'll get busy this weekend.
Gonna drop it on you at the end of the episode. A little surprise. All right, yes, let's start going through the story because there's a lot to cover here, and I'm excited to do it.
Here we go. I imagine everyone listening knows the story, but let's recap for the people. Buttercup, played by Robin Wright, and Wesley, played by Cary Elwes, are a pair of young, beautiful common folk from the land of Florin, who, after years of a stilted relationship, have just realized their true love for each other. Wesley then goes off to seek his fortune and is shortly reported to have been killed by the notorious dread pirate Roberts. 5 years later, Florin's Crown Prince Humperdinck, played by Chris Sarandon, chooses Buttercup to be his bride. Buttercup is still devoted to her dear departed Wesley and doesn't want to marry the prince, but the prince doesn't really care because his secret plan is to have his fiancée kidnapped and killed so that he can blame the neighboring state of Guilder and start a war. Humperdinck has hired a trio of miscreants to do his dirty work. The crafty Sicilian Vizzini, played by Wallace Shawn, the mighty Colossus Fezzik, played by Andre the Giant, and consummate swordsman Inigo Montoya, played by Mandy Patinkin, a tortured soul in lifelong pursuit of revenge on the six-fingered man who killed his father. The trio kidnaps Buttercup and they flee towards Guilder, but soon they find themselves pursued by a mysterious man in black.
Right off the bat, did you know that Chris Sarandon was the reason Susan Sarandon is named Susan Sarandon? They were married? I had no idea.
I didn't. I found that out today doing a little wiki work before the show.
Yeah, pretty impressive, Chris Sarandon.
I tell you, I read his list of spouses in reverse order, and I'm like, no, I can't make the point I was trying to make.
Try.
I got really confused for a minute. Like, wait,
did he take Susan Sarandon's name?
Yeah, that's
I had the same thought. I swear to God. I don't know why.
Yes. Something about the way the Wikipedia lays out when you read it, you're like, oh, he was Chris something else, and then he married Susan Sarandon. That's interesting.
Look.
No, that's not what happened.
If you marry Susan Sarandon, you take her fucking name at this point, all right?
Yeah, you probably do.
Woman's been hot for like 50 years. I don't even know how it's possible. It's impressive. But before we get into our Chris Sarandon escapades, what do you think of a framing device in a movie like this? You like them? Typically, I say no, but it works here.
It's so much a part of the charm of this movie and the way this movie tells you what it is and what to make of it that you can't pull it apart. But it creates a little bit of a hurdle. There's more to absorb at the beginning of this movie because you're meeting this contemporary 80s family in what looks like a realistic setting. And then when we switch to the fairy tale things, the rules are very different. But I love this character. So what can I say?
I was very taken with the fact that Fred Savage is playing the video game Hardball.
Okay.
Which was a baseball game for the Nintendo Entertainment System that I used to fucking love. Wow. I played that game for years. I was looking, the game came out in 1985, like before I was even born, and I was playing it like into the mid 90s, I think. So it was pretty impressive that the game had that kind of staying power. But he's playing it with a joystick, which is just like when people put video games in movies, There's always like weird anachronisms with them, or there used to be. I feel like they're more careful about it now, but he's playing with a flight stick like you would use to play like an airplane, like a Top Gun video game or something. It doesn't really affect the quality of the movie. I just thought it was funny. Fred Savage's character in this movie hates kissing. And
Right.
I think a lot of people that were on sets with him in the past 10 years also hated kissing, but it was like when he would try to corner them and do it at like a work event.
Yikes. I didn't
Allegedly.
remember this had happened. Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Did you look it up after you saw my note?
No, I couldn't even bring myself to look it up. I saw your note. I'm like, oh, fuck. Another
Right.
guy.
Isn't it such a bummer?
It is. With Fred Savage, too.
Even the way I said it, I was just like, I wasn't like happy about saying
No.
that joke. I had to say it. Yeah.
Exhausted by it. It sucks. Fred Savage, very good in this. He was super young in this.
Is this pre-Wonder Years?
That's what I'm thinking because he looks so small.
Yeah, he does look small, little guy. Let's see. The Wonder Years. Yeah, the Wonder Years was a year later. 88 it
Okay.
started. He'd been in a couple things before this. An episode of The Twilight Zone, some show called Morning Star, Evening Star,
Okay.
and like some lowbrow TV shit. But then he was also in The Boy Who Could Fly and Dinosaurs! Exclamation point, which that's not the show, it's an animated short film.
Okay.
So this was like his first real thing, it looks like.
This looks like a breakthrough for him.
Oh no, The Boy Who Could Fly, I guess, was a big deal. Not like it made a bunch of money, but he got some praise for his role there.
Okay.
He was very young.
Talented actor.
Very charming in this role as a little sick kid. And of course, you've got Peter Falk coming in as the grandfather, doing just like a heavy Chicago accent. If you didn't know they were from Chicago, the walls make it clear if you look around.
That's true.
Although he's got a weird like decal of Santa Claus on his wall. And I'm like, does he keep that up year round? There's no indication it's Christmas.
I saw that same thing. I'm like, wait a minute, is this supposed to be a Christmas movie? But then he has a Halloween mask hanging above the paper Santa. So I feel like his room is just strewn with stuff from all seasons.
The set dresser was just like, fuck, I forgot to buy stuff. I got to go through my closet and see what I have.
And he's in a Bears jersey, like you said. It's very Chicago. Peter Falk is great. I never really watched Columbo. I guess I hadn't seen him do many other roles, but he's just perfect in this, except for his sprayed gray hair, which looks ridiculous, but it's part of the corniness.
And sometimes it's not sprayed.
Yes, we'll get to that. We'll come around to that at the very end.
But yeah, the staging device works fine for me. I think it gives the movie a little bit of, it's a nice bit of audience surrogacy, which is hard to do.
Yeah, and I like when it comes back and interrupts scenes and refreshes that point of view about the kissing. The grandson gets more and more pulled into it as he starts to be worried about the characters. He starts out very blasé and just barely able to tolerate his grandpa. And like they managed to pull off this great character arc between these two characters with just the smattering of short scenes.
They get their own little story. They start off, the grandson's not really excited to see his grandfather. They don't seem like they're really connecting in that way you wish. And then by the end, they've got a great relationship. He's going to come back tomorrow and read. You want to rehear the book again the next day? It's a long fucking book, man.
It sounds crazy, but I was actually excited to watch this movie again 2-3 days in a row this week. So I get it.
Yeah, but it takes 2 hours. Think how long it took that kid to read that book. He's 80 years old. He's going to be parched. He's going to need to nap for days after that.
Grandpa's getting worn out.
But enough about Fred Savage. Let's talk about Wesley and Buttercup, because like I mentioned, this farm that is just 2 chickens and a horse.
Yep.
They're both like just ridiculously attractive. You
Yes.
know, they're like 2 of the most beautiful people you've ever seen on screen. Could not be a better match.
Yeah.
And they have great chemistry. You feel the tension between them early on.
Yeah. Reiner does such a great job. Like we said, the production value is not always great, but there are shots that are just beautifully lit. There's enough of those. And some of these setup shots of Wesley and Buttercup are just great because their amazing eyes are catching the light and they're just like looking at each other. And you're just like, oh my God, it's dreamy. What a romance.
I mean, it looks like they shot it in a real like meadow in Ireland. Like it looks just like a beautiful landscape
Yes.
to film a movie
Yeah,
on,
that looks
which
authentic. And
goes a long way to make it feel real. Even if you don't have the money to build huge elaborate sets or whatever, you don't need to when you're just surrounded by such natural beauty.
yeah.
And by natural beauty, I am talking about Cary Elwes and Robin Wright,
Yes.
not just
Both of them.
the country of Ireland.
It's good. It gets you into the film right away.
And the film's moving fast. This whole
Uh-huh.
sequence takes 5 minutes to set them up on the farm, their dynamic and relationship, to separate them, and also sell you on their eternal true love. That all takes about 5 minutes,
Yeah.
if that.
It's wildly fast and skillful storytelling.
Reiner and Goldman, like I said, just at the top of their talents for this one, just making it all work somehow. And then there's immediately a little bit of a downer. We find out Wesley was killed
Yes.
by the Dread Pirate Roberts. Was a real guy, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Dread Pirate Roberts was a real person. One of the most successful pirates of all time, just like in the movie.
Oh, cool. I didn't even know that. That's a nice touch.
And then we pretty much find out that Buttercup's been engaged to this fucking douchebag, Prince Humperdinck. This guy sucks. He seems okay at first, but if you've seen the movie once, like you'll always hate him from the first frames.
And like we talked about, what this movie establishes, that introduction of the pompous prince on the parapet is like fully carried over into Shrek, right? I guess it's a fairy tale trope, but somehow this movie movie just like defines it with a couple of shots standing on a ledge and talking to his people. And it's like, oh yeah, that's what that means to be a pompous ass prince.
Yeah, they get across so much so quickly that even though he doesn't do anything overly villainous for like the first 45 minutes of the movie, you just hate him immediately. It's just very good performance by Chris Sarandon, who like I wasn't really familiar with outside of this movie. I know he's been in plenty of stuff, but he's not like a name in that sense.
Oh,
he does great work in this. And you're right, like the Shrek connection, even everything from the haircut to the way he's dressed, even the name like Farquaad, Humperdinck, they're both like kind of overtly comedic and almost insulting names.
Exactly. Humperdinck is a weird character too, because you don't even realize like you said, he's evil, but you can't quite say why, of course, until you find out he's planning to kill Buttercup in a totally heartless fashion. But he's not twirling his mustache, and actually like they go to great lengths to make it so that when he gets mad in the mildest way. He's like, I'm going to be really put off. And like all his like,
I will be most cross with you.
When he fully loses it later on, when Buttercup sends him over the edge, he's like, I would not talk that way if I were you. Like he just always has the most soft-pedaled anger responses. It's one of the more subtle, funny twists to this character.
You could look at it. It is funny for sure. I definitely laughed when he said the put off line because it is like such a mild way to get angry, but it also plays into his like inherent dishonesty that like he can't even allow himself to feel an honest emotion.
Yeah, it all connects very true to this character that they built.
Not like Count Rugen, perhaps. Although he never really gets mad either.
Yeah, Rugen is more disturbingly cold and calculating and chilling.
They didn't even write that. That was just Christopher Guest.
He's a weird dude.
That's every report of him is like he's not funny at all when he's not filming. He is like not a humorous person in the least.
He doesn't seem fun, but he's amazing on screen in his signature roles, but he does not seem like a fun dude to hang out with.
I think we covered like his two most famous roles now. It's got to be Nigel and Rugen.
Yep.
He's been in some other great stuff too, but this is the pinnacle for him. He owes Rob Reiner thank you note or something.
For sure.
But they're reuniting for Spinal Tap 2 apparently, so we'll see.
That's wild.
I know. I'm a little nervous. Back on track. And then we get into the kidnapping with our three bandits here, which are just immediately captivating characters because they're come in various shapes and sizes and temperaments.
Exactly, yeah.
It's a real rogues gallery. You've got Fezzik, of course. He stands out from the pack because it's fucking Andre the Giant. Anytime his hand is in a shot with somebody else's hand, I just could not help but laugh at the absurdity of how large his hands are.
It looks like a special effect, but it's real. It's amazing.
It's like the size of a rotisserie chicken is what Andre the Giant's hand looks like.
They use it as a gimmick in a couple of shots in a couple of places of the movie just because it makes such an impression on camera.
And then, of course, Mandy Patinkin playing Inigo Montoya. Now, you might quibble with Mandy Patinkin being cast as a Spaniard. Probably wouldn't necessarily fly today. We're trying to, cast actors of the particular background a little more. Mandy Patinkin, of course, a Jewish guy from Chicago, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
But he does a great job. Like, he's awesome as Montoya. He's roguish and funny, but also threatening to a degree. And he's chivalrous, but also a little sly. You always know what he's up to.
And he does that thing. He has that Andy Garcia thing of tears welling in his eyes at any moment. And for a character like this, who is so tortured by his past and is constantly succumbing to waves of emotion about his desire to avenge his father, Patinkin is just so great at evoking that. And like with the romance, the revenge story has real emotional stakes to it. And you feel it because he makes you feel it.
Yeah. And I appreciate that when even though the movie is overtly comedic, when they pay off these big emotional storylines, they're pretty straight.
Yes.
So you get the catharsis that you were hoping for, that the character was hoping for too. And we'll talk more about that when the payoffs do happen. But I'll be honest, I didn't really watch anything with Mandy Patinkin in it between The Princess Bride and Homeland. And when I found out that he was fucking Saul on Homeland, I almost had a heart attack because you don't see him for fucking 25 years. And then you're like, he looks a little familiar, but what else has he been in? And you find out he's fucking Inigo Montoya. That was because Saul's a great character on Homeland. I don't know if you watched Homeland, but he fucking ruined that show.
I saw the first season and I agree. He was a real highlight of it for me.
The first season of Homeland is one of the best seasons of television ever. Everything that came after just got progressively worse. And then I heard it rebounded towards the end, but I couldn't stick around anymore.
Okay, yeah. He was great in that. He's so good. It's funny because I would definitely say he's a real favorite of mine, but from two roles. Like I haven't seen him in anything else.
I know my wife follows him on TikTok and says he's delightful on there, so I'm going to have to check him out.
I've seen little bits. He's an engaging guy. He feels like one of those actors. He's just emotions right on the surface and just constantly like being an actor.
Mandy Patinkin, if you're a listener dinner and you ever want to grab a beer or a glass of wine, no Battle of Wits, just hit us up. You probably live in LA, so you're more likely to hang out with Ian than me.
Yeah,
but
I'm around.
I did notice, though, that let's talk about Wallace Shawn as Vizzini, the Sicilian. His name, sure, everything else about him does not scream Sicilian to me.
No, that's kind of part of what's
kind of the joke, right?
Yeah.
He's such a little twerp, but like in the best way. He plays it so perfectly. And everything, he's like his kind of overinflated sense of intellect, his scheming, the way he browbeats the other two members of his team. He's just a great character to hate.
Yeah, he brings out the contrast because obviously Fezzik and Inigo Montoya are two of the core heroes. We end up with 4 heroes in this movie, and Vizzini's job is to offset them and to show you that he's the real dick in this group, and those two are lovable and absolutely redeemable miscreants.
Yeah, and they drop hints once he reveals that their plan is to kill Buttercup. Both Fezzik and Inigo are not on board, so you immediately get the sense that they're gonna switch sides, even if you're not sure exactly how it's gonna go down.
And we'll probably come back to it, but Andre the Giant is the heart of this movie. There's so many great actors and great performances, and all the actors tell you that too. He is the beating heart of this film. He brings so much humanity and just joy to this movie. The character has this innocence to him, and it starts in this section of the movie when Vizzini gets him down and Inigo picks Fezzik back up by getting him to do his little rhyming shtick, which is a fun thing he does to make himself feel better. And that scene is just, from that moment on, I'm just totally in love with Andre the Giant.
Anybody want a peanut?
That line still gets me every time. That was one of the lines that I took away from this movie after not watching it for 15 or 20 years or something. And that line stuck in my mind. So I knew it was coming. And when I heard him say it, it still broke me up.
Does he do the rhyming thing at any other point in the movie? I didn't catch it. I don't think he does, right? I think it's
they
just
didn't harp on it. I think it comes back once more towards the end as a little callback, but very briefly. But yeah, fortunately they don't. You think, oh, that's going to be his shtick and that's all he's going to do, but they don't beat it to death. They only come back around to it once.
Yeah, some nice restraint there and not beating that joke to death, because it would have been diminishing returns. It worked so well the first time. So we're talking about what was intentional humor and what was just budget constraints. And I had to ask because they see that the ship is chasing them, the kidnappers and Buttercup. There's this ship on their tail and it looks pretty massive from their perspective. It's got this big white sail. It's like somebody's chasing us. And then you see Wesley's boat. It's fucking tiny. Like I would be terrified to take this thing on the open waters. It's like it's like a glorified canoe.
You think it's a sailing ship in the distance and it gets closer and there's long shots of it and you see a man in black walking on the deck. You're like, oh wait, that's a little like dinghy. That's one of those little training sailboats from summer camp.
It needs to be 3 times as big, as Zoolander would say.
It's funny because we talked about things this movie inspired. In our recent Cutthroat Island episode, we saw a lot of things that they seem to have taken from this movie. But one thing they didn't take was the scale of the ships. Like they built genuine, huge, realistic pirate ships or even oversized pirate ships. And this movie, they're like, we don't have that kind of budget. The water is going to be dead flat. The ships are going to be 12 feet long and we're just going to pretend that's normal.
He said, if we make our ships 20 times as big as the ones in A Princess Bride, our movie will be 20 times as successful. Unfortunately for them, it was not the case.
Sorry.
So the movie can show its teeth at times, though, and be pretty serious, pretty scary. And the shrieking eels, I think, is our first real indication of this.
Speaking of showing teeth.
Because Buttercup tries to swim for it, not make a run for it, but she jumps out of the ship. And immediately we come to find out that the water is full of the shrieking eels who make a terrifying noise and look pretty scary. They still look good. Even 35 years later, they look pretty well done.
They feel like some Henson type work. They're just good practical puppets that you don't want in the water with you.
They've aged better than the RUASs.
Yes.
ROUSs. ROUSs, yeah. They've aged a little less well, let's say.
Yeah, we'll get to them.
Was there anything else from this section we had to cover, or are we good to go?
Let's find out what happens next.
So the man pursuing the princess and her captors turns out to be none other than the dread pirate Roberts. Roberts catches up to the kidnappers and proceeds to defeat each man in his own game. He wins a sword fight with Montoya, knocks out Fezzik in hand-to-hand combat, and bests Vizzini in a deadly battle of wits. Roberts then reveals to Buttercup he's actually her long-lost true love, Wesley. He wasn't killed by Roberts, merely captured, and eventually the old Roberts recruited Wesley to take his place. Now reunited, the lovers flee through the deadly fire swamp, barely surviving its many dangers, but as soon as they emerge, they're captured by Humperdinck, who I guess just went around the swamp. Which kind of begs the question, why can't they just go around? Whatever. Buttercup agrees to return home with the prince if he promises not to harm Wesley. Humperdinck promises, then he secretly throws Wesley into his dungeon, the Pit of Despair, where he'll be tortured by the sadistic Count Rugen, played by Christopher Guest, a 6-fingered man. The reason you saw fit to point out that Rugen has 6 fingers on his right hand becomes apparent to us early in this section when Montoya and Wesley have a sword fight.
Yeah, so let's get him up there because that scene to me is the heart of the movie. I mean, it's great already. We've already talked about all kinds of things we love about it. But when it gets to the top of the Cliffs of Insanity, then it's like the airplane fully lifts off. But you don't just go straight to the top of the Cliffs of Insanity. It's a big climb.
You got to climb in comedically easy fashion if you're Andre the Giant, who just doesn't even use his legs to climb the Cliffs of Insanity. He's got 3 people strapped to him, and he's just putting hand over hand and going up almost like he's being pulled by a extra at the top of the cliff.
These effects, we were talking about how the boats, you suddenly realize they're too small, and it blends into this section too, where the effects are like, they get across the idea that the cliffs are impossibly tall and this climb is impossibly dangerous, but they're also really chintzy and kind of just silly, but you love it for that, or hopefully you do.
But it almost has to be a deliberate choice to make them climb like without using their legs, right? Because it wouldn't have been any harder. Because even Wesley climbs the cliffs just with his arms. He's not putting his feet on the rocks to brace himself. I know Andre the Giant was actually like severely injured before the filming of this movie, so he couldn't do a lot physically.
Really acted out like a real rope climb, I think.
But Cary Elwes could have, and he doesn't.
He's at the very beginning, when he jumps onto the base of the rope, there's a shot where he's like climbing it like a normal person would, like he's kicking off the rocks, because it's a real guy climbing a rope for a second. And then all the long shots are that fully stilted, like guy on a wire being pulled up and just doing the hand over hand move that looks totally fake.
Totally ridiculous. But good for them for shooting on a real cliff, I guess, because that's the only way they could get those shots.
The close-ups are clearly on a cheesy set with some fake rocks, and then they really did apparently go to Dover and shoot some real cliff stuff for the wide shots.
Was Eric Johnson there?
He was there working out a song he was going to debut later.
Huh, interesting. You're the one who actually taught me that Cliffs of Dover is from the 90s. I assumed it was like from the 70s all my life.
Well, really? Okay.
Yeah. But, the cliffs, great location. And then you get to the top and you're right. Like this is one of the most memorable sword fights in movie history, you'd have to say, right?
It's so special because the sword fighting is great. When they talk about how long the 2 actors practiced that so that they could get really good at it. Rob Reiner told them from the start, hey, I don't want doubles doing this stunt fight. I want you guys to actually learn this stuff and do it. And they do amazing. It looks really authentic and it's really exciting action. But just the way that scene starts, the negotiation between Inigo and the man in black about, can I throw you a rope? How will I trust you? And then he swears on his father. And these 2 men make a connection. And then they have that funny, like, chill out, take your time before we fight kind of thing. So there's so much character work going on in this that before this exciting fight starts, you establish the relationship between the 2 swashbuckling heroes of the movie. And I would argue that they're co-heroes because more of the swashbuckling action ends up in Inigo's lap where Wesley finishes it out immobile. But it's just wonderful character work. And then it's wonderful fighting and it's hilarious repartee. And it's where the movie's absolutely soaring.
Yeah, it immediately makes you love both these characters from how they're so honest and like upfront with what their intentions are with each other. And I don't know, it's a way to have 2 characters antagonize each other without either of them becoming the antagonist.
Yes.
Which is like a really hard thing to do.
It's beautiful writing. Yeah. Because like you're saying, they're almost doing the same thing. They achieve this same level of honesty with each other. And yet they're not mirrors of each other. They're each very uniquely motivated and characterized. It's just beautiful writing and beautiful acting. Like it works so well.
And we talked, the budget wasn't huge, but they did spend some money getting the best sword fighting choreographer in Hollywood for this movie. They got Bob Anderson, who did Star Wars, 3 Musketeers, the Lord of the Rings movies, which...
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, like he was still working up until pretty much his death in 2012.
Wow.
So he was working with both these guys. They both had their own coaches for months prior to filming. But then when filming began, they were working with Bob Anderson to choreograph the fight with as much of them in it as possible. It was pretty rad.
And I remember the thrill of seeing their quite realistic, compelling sword play and the fact that they discuss it as they're doing it. And they're talking about, oh, I see you're trying this defense. I can't quote you the exact lines, but they're so good about, oh, yeah, I find that Capoferro negates this. And yeah, unless your opponent has studied grip. And like, it's just wonderful to have that going on and have the funny way they're discussing it as they're fighting. It's electric.
Woogie, woogie, woogie. Sorry, can't say that. It's electric around me without...
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Making me think of the electric slide. And then, so after he defeats Montoya in a very chivalrous way, he doesn't kill him. He just bops him on the head and is on his way. But then we get to his battle with Fezzik, which is a little more like overtly comedic.
Yes, it's kind of silly.
It's Andre the Giant fighting Cary Elwes, which is just... For Cary Elwes to come out on top in this match, there needs to be some like silliness at play.
Yeah.
And there is. But again, it's a very compelling scene. It's much shorter than the sword fight, kind of breezing through this one, because how long do you want to dwell on this?
It's the quick, easy middle, because then the Battle of Wits is one of the absolute signature scenes of the movie that I think made one of the biggest impressions on audiences.
I remembered Wallace Shawn laughing maniacally and then dropping dead instantly. Like, even decades after the last time I saw this movie, I could picture that shot quickly in my mind. It's just iconic. And it's obviously played for laughs, no pun intended, because he's still grinning maniacally as he passes out from the poison.
Yeah.
And is this also like the first instance we have of taking a little bit of poison for months and months to build up a resistance to it that became like a popular joke on Twitter?
Yeah, that seems like such a trope, the building up the poison resistance, not only in Twitter, but like just as a plot point. But yeah, where did Goldman get that? Did he invent that? Because it's brilliant. The payoff, the punchline is some development.
That he poisoned both cups is just absolutely fantastic way to resolve that puzzle without it feeling cheap.
Yeah.
And then one of the few spots where the movie stumbles a little bit is right immediately after him rescuing Buttercup, because Wesley's being a dick in this whole section, right?
He's being a little too much of a dick, and you get why they're trying to amp up the emotions, right? You want your characters to have these wide swings. And so Wesley's really mad at Buttercup because he believes that she's betrayed their true love and too easily accepted this betrothal, which she hasn't. And she's very indignant about it. But he kind of crosses a line that feels a little bit icky, especially when he raises his hand to her and is like, next time my hand will fly, princess. Like,
he was dead for 5 fucking years.
Yeah, that's true too.
As far as she knew, what is she supposed to do? It was a little gaslighty, maybe a little emotionally abusive in this section, but different time.
Yeah. So. And she's appropriately indignant to his characterization. So she defends herself and doesn't back down to his unfortunate characterization of her.
It's the one section of the movie that I thought, didn't age great. And also like her weird obsession with suicide. Like it's almost played for a laugh. She's like, yep, as soon as I get to the honeymoon suite, I'm just going to kill myself. But she keeps saying it. And it's maybe doesn't land quite as comedically in 2022 as it did or 2023 now.
Yeah.
As it did in 1987.
Maybe not. But the faults of this movie are pretty small and we're pretty willing to overlook them based on how much good stuff there is.
Absolutely. Good stuff like the Fire Swamp. Fire Swamp rules. I remember this sequence terrifying me as a kid.
Maybe that's why I didn't like it. The Fire Swamp stuck in my mind as like, ooh, this is a slog and I don't want to get through this section of the movie. But maybe it's because I was actually scared by it, not because I thought it was tedious or poorly executed.
Let's talk about the dangers of the Fire Swamp. There's obviously fire, which is played well, and Wesley is able to identify some kind of auditory tell to dodge them pretty easily. So they're not much of a threat after the first one.
Yeah.
There's the lightning sand, which is just quicksand, but terrifyingly efficient quicksand, because it's not like the one in Cutthroat Island that takes 10 minutes to swallow you up. You go right down immediately, and there's no coming back up unless you concoct a scheme.
And they play that danger pretty straight. Like the fire, they make it into a joke quickly where he's, without breaking stride in his explanation of his history, he's moving her out of the way of the flames, and it becomes a funny little thing. The lightning sand is fucking scary, and I'm particularly susceptible to being sympathetic to actors or characters underwater, under quicksand, and holding my breath unconsciously.
Rachel Weisz scene in Constantine in the bathtub.
Exactly.
I remember you had an issue with that.
Yes. I'm in my mind holding my breath while these characters are under the quicksand. We're running out of air. Help!
And they're really gasping by the time they get out of the quicksand. So they don't play it as like a inconsequential threat. It's
frightening.
Serious.
Yeah, even when they come back out, they're in bad shape, and it's acted very dramatically. And it's fun. It's cool. And actually, the Fire Swamp looks good. We talked about how some of the stuff looks cheesy. There's shots of the Fire Swamp that are as good as anything in Dagobah. Like it looks like really a beautifully constructed set.
But that's not the only two. There's more than two threats in the Fire Swamp.
Oh, that's true.
We got to talk about the ROUSs, which they don't look or move like rats of either usual or unusual size. But maybe that works because there's clearly like small people inside these rat costumes moving around on all fours. But it makes them feel weirder and alien because they're not moving like how we would expect a four-legged creature to move.
Yes.
And they're not played for laughs either. Like one attacks Wesley and one of them is almost enough to take him out.
Yeah, that's a grisly, bloody, dangerous battle. Made stranger by the fact that he dismisses them the moment before they attack him. I've never been able to make sense of what they were going for in that scene.
I think he was just trying to keep Buttercup calm is the way I read it.
Yeah.
If he acknowledged them, because her back was to them, if he acknowledged them in any way, she would freak out. Yeah. He's just trying to play it cool.
He tried too hard though, because he's staring at them. He's seen them, and we know he's seen them. So why does he say, I don't believe they exist the moment before one tackles him to the ground?
It's a good line. It's like a laugh line. I got a good chuckle out of it because he's staring at them when he says it. But yeah, I think just trying to keep Buttercup from freaking out was the only way I could justify it.
Yeah, that does make sense.
And then he kills one by just stabbing it 3 times in the belly. I think everyone in this movie, all their most vital vital organs like their heart, their brain, lungs. They're just directly behind the navel. People die immediately from belly stabs in this movie.
It's true.
Except Inigo.
Except Inigo. He has heart of a champion, and it's not behind his belly button.
That's where hearts usually are. Because, yeah, the navel, the belly area is just the most sensitive part. It's an immediate killing blow to get pierced by a tiny little blade.
Yeah, is that them trying to be safe? A lot of the talk about this movie is about its appeal to kids, and you hear that talk as the actors look back at it, and they all talk about how many people have come up to them and told them they love the movie, and now I'm showing it to my children, and my children love it. So you're like, okay, was this designed at all for kids? Because I never believed it was. It's to me is fully designed for me as a grown person, even the first time I saw it. But it does work for kids because it never gets too sketchy or dangerous. And maybe stabbing in the gut is part of that.
Yeah, there's no throat slashing going on in this movie.
Exactly.
It's probably why I was allowed to watch it when I was like 7 or 8. But
yeah.
Also, I thought this movie was scary as shit when I was a little kid, even though I loved it. There were parts of it that I definitely were terrified of.
And those rodents were definitely one of those parts. But like,
absolutely.
It's lying on the ground in front of him. He does not chop its head off. He just stabs it in the belly.
Because it's where all the good stuff is. And then they get captured by Humperdinck. And this is where we start learning he's a little more overtly villainous than we thought. Because kind of everything he's done up to this point is pretty rational.
He puts on a show, yeah.
He whispers to Rugen that just take him to the pit of despair. First of all, if you have a place that you call the pit of despair, like that's a red flag, right?
That is a little bit of a red flag. If she knew he even owned a pit of despair, she might have never trusted him in the first place to let Wesley go.
Could we drop in a line from 30 Rock?
Okay.
That's a deal breaker, ladies.
Yeah, exactly. But like even he's being pompous about his tracking skills throughout, but he's not doing anything villainous while he's trying. He's looking for his fiance, which is what you would hope he would do. And as far as he knows, Wesley is the Dread Pirate Roberts. So like he's been the right for being skeptical of him and a little concerned. It's just when he gives his word that he would set him free and then tells him to kill him anyway, you're like, okay, this guy is actually overtly villainous.
Yeah, I like that about Humperdinck too, that his hunting skills are legit. He's a villain and we know that by this point, but he's an admirable one because his scenes where he's like, someone fought a giant here or something like, and then he sniffs the vial and he's iocane powder. I bet my life on it. He can smell the odorless iocane powder. He has amazing skills. And so it's fun that your villain is actually an impressively skilled guy.
And like we said about the duel between Wesley and Inigo, at this point, Humperdinck is an antagonist without being a villain because he's an obstacle for the two characters to be together. But then he becomes a full-fledged villain in the third act.
But I think, don't forget, Vizzini was supposed to kill Buttercup from the start, and he had hired her. And maybe it wasn't clear. Actually, we didn't know with that plot point.
We didn't know he hired her until Humperdinck tells Rugen, which comes a little later.
That's true. It is late in the film where he says, when I hired Vizzini, and he didn't really say that. I always kind of
it's right outside the pit of despair before they go down it for the first time and see Wesley tied up down there. Yeah. I thought that was when we find out that he hired Vizzini.
I think you're right. That's a subtle point. I felt like somehow it was clear from the context, but maybe it wasn't. And maybe this is really skillful riding the line until this moment, just like you said.
You could deduce it perhaps, but we don't know enough about the politics of these countries to understand why they want to go to war or why Humperdinck would want them to go to war. Those lines aren't colored in enough for us to jump to that conclusion, I don't think. Unless I missed a line, but I don't think I did.
Vizzini does say we were hired to start a war, but he never really reveals who hired them. So that's true.
Yeah, it could be the Dread Pirate Roberts for all we know at that point.
Yeah, a lot of mystery.
All right, was anything else from this section we had to talk about, or are we ready to take it home?
Let's take it home.
All right.
Back at the castle, Buttercup tells Humperdinck she'd actually rather kill herself than marry him. And so he falsely agrees to send ships in search of Wesley. But in truth, he once again secretly plans to kill her on their wedding night to frame Gilder as a pretense for war. Meanwhile, as Olive Florin prepares for the royal wedding, Inigo Montoya reunites with his friend Fezzik and resolves to recruit the Man in Black to help them storm the castle so that Inigo can kill Count Rugen. When Buttercup realizes the prince had no intention of actually searching for Wesley, she insults Humperdinck, who flies into a rage and then retreats to the pit of despair where he tortures Wesley to his seeming death. Wesley's echoing death scream leads Inigo and Fezzik to his body, which they take to a local healer named Miracle Max. Wesley turns out to be only mostly dead, and they convince Max to resurrect him. As Wesley slowly regains control of his weakened body, the trio formulate a plan and storm the castle. Everything ends well as Inigo gets his revenge on Rugen, and Wesley rescues Buttercup from Humperdinck. Then Fezzik procures 4 white horses, and our heroes ride off together into the dawn.
Yeah, this is a full half of the movie, really, is the third act. because
Yes.
you made a point of checking. Wesley gets captured at exactly the midpoint of the movie. But that's really the first 2 acts up to that point. And then this is the 3rd act, which just takes up a lot more time.
We could have divided it up a little bit differently and called that the midpoint, and then some of what we put in the 3rd act be the second half of the 2nd act, which is typically like the middle 50% of the movie. Because really the 3rd act sometimes is only like the very climax stuff, which there's more than that in this. There's a lot of setup, there's multiple torture scenes.
The machine.
This is where the movie gets Mel Brooksy, right? Because we meet the character who's known as the albino. And for me, I was getting major Igor from Young Frankenstein vibes from this dude.
Yeah, and even the bit where he's talking in that really raspy, growly voice at first and then just clears his throat and has a regular voice. That's a very like Mel Brooksy type joke, but it worked on me for sure.
Yeah.
I was cracking up at that scene.
That actor's very funny. He delivers it perfectly.
I guess he was in agony the entire time filming this because he was allergic to the contact lenses they used on him.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, he was like, he's never watched the movie, he claimed.
Oh,
He was in
damn.
agonizing pain throughout filming it and refused to watch it because of that.
What a shame.
Can you imagine being in The Princess Bride and never watching it?
Especially, yeah, when you compare it to all we did this week was watch these other actors like Princess Bride changed my life. 35 years later, it's still, my life is organized around this time and the movie and this experience I had with these other people. And this guy's like, fuck that film. I'm never going to watch it.
Fucking piece
Poor
of
dude.
shit. I hope he's watched it since. We may never
I
know.
hope so.
So the torture stuff is played mostly straight, but the pit of despair, there are jokes thrown in, but we're supposed to buy that Wesley's in like real agony. It's not meant to be downplayed in that sense.
Yeah, it's a darker humor. Like Rugen is being cold and evil and twisted about the pain and enjoying it, but it's pretty dark humor because all of Wesley's reactions feel really real and awful.
And his screams are pretty well, like Cary Elwes was playing that fully dramatically. His screams seem genuine.
Yeah.
Pretty well done.
And that actual death scream, which is amped up as a special sound effect scream because it echoes throughout the entire kingdom, that was harsh. That was intense. And yeah, there's a shot of him from a distance just flopping on the table while he's screaming out this horrific scream. And I made a note here because Goldman wrote a couple great books about screenwriting and about his experience in Hollywood. And in one of them, he says that when he wrote that scene in the book and he realized he actually had to kill Wesley off and let Wesley die, that day when he wrote that scene, he was wrecked emotionally. But he also found that that was a true high point in his creative life because he realized that he had truly formed a bond with a character that he had written out of nothing. And so it was like a really meaningful moment for him. And it comes across pretty powerfully on screen.
I have to wonder, and I hate to do this, but Cary Elwes is so good in this movie. And then, I don't know if you've ever seen Saw, the first one. He's so fucking bad in that movie. Did he forget how to act in between them?
You know, I've heard that and I've avoided Saw because it's basically the definition of the type of horror movie that I thought I didn't want to see. So I don't know from experience, but it's a very valid question because he's fantastic in this.
You know what, though? I'd say you'd probably be fine with the first Saw.
Okay.
It's the ones that come after that kind of lean into the more negative aspects of the aught era horror genre.
Okay.
But the first one is a pretty well done little mystery that's not as gory as people remember. It's more implied than
Fair enough.
kind of
Yeah.
explicit. But the acting in it is uniformly horrible. And I don't understand why, because there's good actors. And Danny Glover's in it being terrible.
Yeah.
Cary Elwes is in it being terrible. I don't understand. Michael
weird.
Emerson's pretty shitty in it. And I love Michael Emerson. It's just uniformly bad performances for some reason. I have no idea why. But it's a stark contrast from this. And then he was good in even like Liar Liar in the late 90s. And
Oh, really? Okay.
yeah, Robin Hood, Men in Tights, like we mentioned. I don't know what we're wrong with Saw. But then, so then right after the death scream, which is, like we said, the darkest point of the movie, we get Miracle Max, which is by
Yes.
far like the silliest sequence in the movie.
God.
Billy Crystal in just pancake makeup.
The 1980s loved Billy Crystal and they loved this scene. This was obviously a small part of the movie, but it was in every trailer and every commercial was all about Billy Crystal.
And again, this feels very much like a Mel Brooks sequence that
Yes.
you find in a movie. The way the married couple bickers.
Yes.
Which, that's Carol Kane, right?
Yes, and Carol Kane is amazing. Like she actually might be topping Billy Crystal in this when she roars into the scene, and it's awesome.
I've never been a big Billy Crystal fan, so yeah, I appreciate Carol Kane a little more in this movie.
Okay.
But even Crystal's good in this, as much as I
Yeah.
don't ordinarily love his shtick. Because I think he hosted the Oscars like every year when I started watching them, and I never found him funny.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was an interesting time.
Interesting is a good way to put it. Sure. Pretty boring, but no one got slapped,
That's something to be thankful for.
I guess.
Yeah, Miracle Max it's fun. It's fun that near the end of the movie when we think we know all the characters and where they're going, that there's this thing out of left field and it's just wacky and silly. But it also hews really close to the meaningful parts of the story, right? They come around both to Inigo's vow of revenge, which seems very powerful. He's one of the justifications he offers Max for why it's righteous for him to take this job. And then they figure out that actually true love is the real reason you should take this job, which Carol Kane berates him with. And all those things, you're like, yeah, this is real stuff. These characters have real motivations. And then, of course, Max has his own motivation. He wants to get back at Humperdinck, who fired him from his royal job.
And I love that bit of writing, too, because it plays back into Humperdinck being an asshole is why Wesley gets brought back to life to play out the end of the movie. Because otherwise, if Max was doing it for the money, sure, the scene's funny, but it doesn't resonate as much. But now you're seeing the ripple effects of Humperdinck just being a total douchebag, coming back to bite him in the ass, kind of strengthens the journey that the heroes go on.
It's great writing. And then just like the fact we're about to get to the climactic showdown, the big fight of the movie, is not between the hero and the villain. It's between the secondary hero and the villain's right-hand man. They wrote this movie where the hero is literally immobile, being carried around and lying in a bed for the climax.
I love when the secondary hero and like a secondary villain get a showdown, because for me, that payoff is so satisfying because it means you're watching a movie that put the effort in to make these characters have a rivalry or a story arc that makes sense to pay off to this degree. When two secondary characters can have a payoff this big, it just means that everything done up to that point was well orchestrated.
And it's such a big payoff, right? We all love Inigo by this point, and you're like, oh my God, when Rugen gets the better of him, he's stabbing the shit out of him in both arms and in his belly, like you said, and he's bleeding all over. And you're like, no, like it's really powerful. And then when he comes back, and he comes back in a way that's both emotionally incredibly powerful, that he fights through the pain and turns the tables on Rugen. And it's fucking hilarious because he keeps doing his hello, my name is Inigo Montoya throughout this thing. Each line reading gets more energetic. It's thrilling and funny at the same time. It's just the best.
It's deeply cathartic by the time he delivers the killing blow to Rugen.
Yeah.
He just seems like a real dickbag based on everything we know about him at this point.
Nothing redeemable about that character. We're just fine seeing him cut down.
Not to mention a coward. He runs away from Inigo and then
that's true.
The knife equivalent of sucker punches him. He throws a dagger at him from 20 feet away.
Exactly.
It's just really great payoff to this Inigo storyline, because you're right. Like, it's almost a 1A and 1B story, not even a secondary plot line.
Exactly. He's part of the hero's journey of this movie, and he ends up being the swashbuckling payoff. Then Wesley has a totally cerebral payoff. He almost doesn't get up out of that bed, and yet he bests the real big bad guy.
He just shit talks him into surrendering, essentially.
It's so fantastic. This is the to the pain speech for anyone who's trying to remember how this goes down. Humperdinck says to the death, and he says to the pain, and he explains how he's going to chop him up and leave his ears so that he can hear every scream of every woman and child who shrieks back in horror at what he's become. And I remember being scared, and I still get that tingle when he goes, we're talking about Elwes's performance, when he goes into the speech and he describes to the pain. I'm just as scared as Humperdinck is in that moment. It's excellent.
Yeah, he's delivering it. It's not played for laughs at all. He's not blinking. He's extremely intense, very believable. And then, of course, the humor comes in when he stands up and holds his sword for long enough to convince Humperdinck that he's well enough to fight. And then as soon as Humperdinck is tied up, he just collapses again. That's where you can breathe again. The tension is relieved to some extent, but it's a brilliantly written and brilliantly performed monologue.
Yeah.
And it goes a ways to making you believe that Wesley could have had a successful career as like a feared pirate. Because really nothing we've seen up to that point has been super intimidating from him.
This is the peak of it. He bests Vizzini earlier on with a similar sort of battle of wits instead of a battle of strength. But Vizzini does all the talking in that. And this is like, this man is a force.
Yeah, even when he was dealing with Vizzini, he was almost amiable to him. Like he was just going along for the ride. There was no intensity because he knew he was going to win regardless. He wasn't worried.
And he brings it here.
Really well done. And then everyone rides off into the sunset. We find out Inigo is going to be the Dread Pirate Roberts now, which I could not remember if Inigo survived. Once he got stabbed in the belly, I was like, oh no, like he's a goner. That's where all the stuff is.
Yeah, he's pretty bad off. But
no,
that's a fun little footnote at the end. He's like, okay, maybe I'll try that.
So does that mean that him and Wesley have to go out on the open seas for another 5 years though, so he can convince everyone that Inigo's the Dread Pirate Roberts and Buttercup just has to sit around for another 5 years?
Oh, shoot, I shouldn't be that long because he doesn't need the training that Wesley needed to get good at swordplay and everything. He just needs that one shakedown cruise where Wesley pretends he's the first mate and calls Inigo Roberts.
True.
Maybe they can get that done in 3 months.
Maybe Buttercup can even go out with them. Why not?
Yeah, man, I would have watched that movie, the four of them on a pirate ship.
That would have ruled. But I mean, they all live happily ever after, as they do in fairy tales. And then we go back to lovely Chicago, where we find out that Fred Savage and his grandpa are going to be best buds now.
It's sweet.
It is sweet.
He's come a long way in the course of this one afternoon reading a book.
Maybe if he had more positive male influence influence in his life, he would not have ended up sexually harassing people on TV and film sets.
Yeah, if he had a real
Allegedly.
grandpa like Peter Falk.
I mean, I don't know much about Peter Falk. I can't say for sure if he was like the best dude in the world.
We can't.
So.
We can't just hand him over to Peter Falk without doing a little bit of vetting. But his character in this movie was certainly the right kind of grandpa you want in your life. We brought this up earlier on. There's a little nitpick because apparently, like Peter Falk, and I heard Rob Reiner relate this, that Peter Falk was like over 60 when he got this role, and he was telling Rob Reiner, "I don't think I can convincingly play a grandpa." And they actually tested out prosthetic makeup on him because he's like, "I need to look older."
He looks just like the old guy from Up in this movie. Like, are you kidding me? Like, he's an old man.
Yeah, he's perfectly old enough to be an actual grandpa of this kid. So I guess the prosthetic makeup, they're like, that looks like shit. You can't do that. But he ended up, it seems like he coaxed them into like spraying his hair down with this cheap can of like silver spray paint that you use in productions in high school to like make your kids look old. And so that part looks really phony. His mustache looks bad. I mean, it's all silvery the whole time, except the last line of the movie is this incredibly heartwarming line. Fred Savage says, "Oh, maybe you can come back tomorrow and read it to me again." And he turns around and looks right in the camera and says, "As you wish." And his hair is fucking brown. It's not silvery. And then it cuts back. And again, you see him right away. And then you see silvery guy walk out of the room. I'm like, what just happened? He got young when he said, "As you wish."
A little continuity error, but we can forgive it. Just fun to point out. Next time you're watching it, to keep an eye out for that last line. So that was The Princess Bride, little movie. You might have heard of it.
Yeah, check it out if you haven't.
We talked about Rob Reiner not too long ago, so I don't want to cover him in too much depth now, but there is some news on what he's up to. I thought he was retired because he hadn't released anything since 2017. He made a war drama called Shock and Awe, which was released on the DirecTV network, which is where you want your movies to go.
Of course.
That's what I hear. But in June of 2021, he revealed he's working on a 10 to 13 episode TV project covering the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. I don't know if he still is. I can't find anything more current than that. And also, it seems like the world's kind of moved on from that relationship to some extent, whether that's good or bad. I just don't hear much about them anymore.
I can see why he would launch into that because he was, at least from our perspective, from the Twitter perspective, he became very visible as a Trump critic on Twitter.
Right. Yeah. He's very active on there. But Trump's been out of office for almost 3 years at this point. It's
harder to see to feel it.
And he's got bigger fish to fry because, like we mentioned earlier, he's making Spinal Tap 2, which could be out late 2023 or early 2024. I'm not sure. I think it's in pre-production. I don't think it's filming yet.
I don't know anything about it. I just hope they came up with a unique hook story idea that takes you somewhere where I can't imagine where it's going, right? Because I don't want to see the movie I can picture, which is like retreading the same ground. I don't really want to see that movie, I think. But I do want to see these brilliant comedians come up with something fresh and funny. So let's hope for the best.
Yeah. Michael McKean is still very much kicking and at the top of his game, having seen him. He's very busy as an actor, more so than Harry Shearer still does a lot of voice work. But Christopher Guest hasn't really acted in anything in quite some time. I thought he was like fully retired at this point. If they can't get the whole band back together, I would say don't bother.
That'd be hard to fill any of those holes.
And Harry Shearer's 80 years old too, but he's still working. I want it to be great. I want it to work, but I won't be shocked if it doesn't.
No,
so we'll just wait and see.
We'll keep our expectations low and our hopes high.
You're never going to guess where we've talked about William Goldman a lot. Do you remember what other movie we've covered that he's written?
I didn't, but tell us.
Oh, we got to go way back to the beginning days of this podcast. Our third episode? No, our fourth, because we're counting the bonus episodes as full episodes. But he wrote a little film called Dreamcatcher, the absolute fucking insane Lawrence Kasdan horror movie, which is just an amazing cast, by the way. What a fucking cast in that movie.
Yeah.
Seriously, go watch Dreamcatcher. It is not a bad time. It's so stupid, but it's so weird. It's worth watching.
We had a great time with it. We had a great time talking about it. I wonder how our early episodes hold up now. I feel like we've come a long way, but we may not have. We might just be saying the same dumb shit we did then, but we had a lot of fun with that. We knew William Goldman was this celebrated guy. Butch Cassidy.
Yeah, we talked about it a lot in that episode that we were like, what the fuck is he doing here? But he wrote it. I can't explain it any more than you can. It blows my mind. But he sadly passed away in 2018. He was 87 years old, though, so he had a nice long life.
Yeah,
and
quite a career.
Some fantastic movies. He also wrote All the President's Men.
Okay.
He's got some great stuff under his belt.
For sure.
Some stinkers, too, like The General's Daughter. I'm looking at one.
Okay.
Whatever. So let's talk about Cary Elwes a little bit because he's worked steadily. He's never really been out of the public eye, but he maybe never became the big movie star that people thought he might be after this movie.
Right.
Not the big leading man, but he was in, after this, Glory, Days of Thunder, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and Shadow of the Vampire. So those are all fairly prestigious films.
Sure.
Big name directors, big budgets, won some awards, got good ratings from critics, but then he would also do stuff like Hot Shots, Robin Hood Men in Tights, The Crush, which was the Alicia Silverstone as a horny teenager who wants to fuck Cary Elwes movie.
Oh man, missed that one.
Or like to the point where she's a little crazy about it.
Okay.
Like kind of a Fatal Attraction movie, but with a unreasonable age gap factored in.
Okay.
And then he's been in the Saw franchise, not just in the first one. He's back. He's appeared in other stuff. Saw 3D, and I think he had a cameo in Saw 3 maybe, which are not the same movie, by the way. Saw 3D is like Saw 7 or something.
Okay, good to know.
And he's done a lot of TV, but like good TV. Life in Pieces, which is a show I quite enjoyed. The Art of More, Stranger Things, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And then he's got some big stuff on the horizon. He's going to be in Dead Reckoning Part 1 next year, the Mission Impossible new one coming out. So that's a big franchise for him to get involved in.
For sure.
And the upcoming Zack Snyder space opera, Rebel Moon, which is also going to be a two-parter. I think they're filming now, or they filmed Part 1 already. And Snyder wants that to be his next big franchise, a new original IP that's going to become a big tentpole thing for somebody. So
good luck,
either
Snyder.
way, but the first one's got a huge budget and a lot of stars in it, so I'm sure it'll generate a lot of buzz for Elwes.
That's good to hear.
He's back on the horse, so to speak, no pun intended. Robin Wright, before this, she was mostly known for the soap opera Santa Barbara. To give her the time off to make this, they actually made her re-up her contract, so she had to stay on Santa Barbara for a couple of years after this.
Oh, wild.
Because this was being filming while the show, because soap operas don't take like time off, I don't think.
Okay.
They're pretty much always on.
I don't know.
I've never really watched soap operas. I don't know much about them.
But yeah, there's quite a bit of content.
Yeah. She also was famously Jenny in Forrest Gump. That's probably her other most famous role.
Sure.
But she's been in big movies throughout her career. Stuff like Unbreakable, White Oleander, New York, I Love You, Moneyball, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. She's in the Wonder Woman franchise and the DC Extended Universe, the Justice League movies, Blade Runner 2049. And then, of course, she was a co-lead and later the main lead in House of Cards, Netflix's big foray into prestige TV.
That was huge for sort of her reemerging as a big Hollywood star, I feel like.
And she's great in it, as much as that show has a weird pall over it now because of Spacey. Her whole character is really fascinating on it, and she does a great job portraying it. It's a complicated character. It was a good show. I really enjoyed the first season, and then it got a little pulpy after that for my taste.
Same here. I'll add a little note that I saw. Another thing that Goldman said about Robin Wright was he's like, she could have been the biggest female star in the world. He thought so much of her after making this movie, and he's like, but she didn't want it. His take was that she wanted to live a normal life. She wasn't one of those actors who would give up everything to be a star. And so she certainly worked. She had a very prestigious career, as you just talked about, but he felt like she didn't soar as high as she could have because she just wanted to be a real normal person.
She wasn't out for success at all costs. She wanted a balance, and that's worth celebrating too.
Gotta respect it.
We talked about Mandy a little bit throughout the episode because he never really became a movie star either. Worked steadily. He was in some movies, but not like the guy in any of them. But he was on Chicago Hope for 6 years.
Okay, that's big.
He was, that was a big deal at the time. Dead Like Me, which is a show I enjoyed. Criminal Minds, Homeland, The Good Fight, which I think is still airing. And it's always on like best of lists at the end of the year, and I've never watched it, but it seems like something I should watch. And he's also stays very active in the theater and performing on stage. And he's an accomplished singer, like David Duchovny and Vin Diesel that we've talked about on our podcast. He's an accomplished singer and musician, so good for him. He stays busy. And follow him on TikTok. Apparently he's delightful.
Good guy. I like him.
He looks like a big teddy bear. I just want to give him a hug. I don't know why. That's what I got. Was there anything else you wanted to say about The Princess Bride? You could probably wax poetic about this movie forever.
I probably could, which would be horrible for the audience, but I didn't come up with a good final thought for this movie, but just so happens that William Goldman did, or he said something in his book, which I jotted down so I can repeat it here. Usually this part of the show, we're like, what was the big picture of what happened here? Like, why did it not succeed? So here's what he had to say on that top. He goes, just what was the movie? Was it a comedy? Fingers crossed, yes. Was it an action flick? Fingers crossed again. Was it a romance? Believe it. We were in dangerous terrain because whenever you mix genres in a movie, that's where you end up. So that was his explanation for why it wasn't bigger. That mixed genre and difficulty of the studio selling the movie are what he attributed its lack of initial success to.
We bring that up all the time, right? It's a common thing on the podcast. If your movie kind of fails to put itself in a genre that you can easily market to an audience, it's usually a sign that it's maybe not going to be the commercial hit you're hoping for. But we've talked about lots of great movies that do that because that makes a movie a little more exciting and a little less predictable.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great creative choice, but it's always been a tricky commercial territory.
Yeah. And if you pull it off, which we've said throughout this episode, the movie pulls it off amazingly, pairing up real thrills, real drama, real romance, and hilarious comedy. And it really works. And that's why those movies go so big after the fact, because it's hard to sell cold, but once the audience warms up, man, they really warm up to it.
Yeah. I could not say it better than William Goldman. No one should be surprised by that. But that's The Princess Bride, one of the big ones. We said when we started this podcast, this was up there, and it's fun to check another one off the list.
This was really fun to do, and I hope people who are listening get inspired to go back and watch it again, or watch the home movie version. If you feel like, oh, I've watched the original too many times, watch that home movie thing, because if you're a fan of it, it'll just give you so many feelings, and let us know what you think.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your feedback, and we're going to go a little less prestige-y for next week's episode. We're going to go a little more ridiculous, no less enjoyable, perhaps, depending on your perspective, but certainly less prestigious. We're going Crank High Voltage.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Oh, shit is right, buddy. Get your fucking jumper cables, because we are.
I'm going to be shocked into watching this movie.
I fucking love the Crank movies, as stupid as they are. They're so fucking stupid. God, they're some of the worst movies ever made that I love. I have no idea why. Maybe we'll discover why. Maybe I can do some looking inward and figure out what I enjoy about them.
Let's find out. I think I've seen half of one of them, so this is going to be semi-new to me, but I have a feeling I'm in for some wild action and some wild Cockney London accent.
You fucking nailed it, buddy, but it's probably wilder than you're even expecting.
Okay, great.
If I remember this movie correctly, and I think I do. I don't think I'm mixing them up. This is the sequel, but I don't think you'll be too lost. You can probably piece together what happened in the original.
I'll figure it out.
Jason Statham shot a bunch of guys and almost died.
Okay, got it.
Thank you guys so much for listening. Please rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. If you can, we would appreciate it. Give us a follow on Twitter at BlastZonePod. Stay up to date on what episodes are coming next. You can DM us on there. You can also email us if you're not on Twitter, BlastZonePod@gmail.com with any questions, feedback, suggestions, you name it. We're there for it.
Or just quote the movie at us.
Yeah, we like hearing that. And we'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.